It's the county conversation, and this week we are going to be reviewing the end of the Metro Bank, not just group stages, not just quarterfinals, but semi-finals as well. We have to wait a month until we get the final, which more on that later. But it's just me, Cameron Ponsonby and Nick Friend this week. Between us, I reckon we've watched more of the Metro Bank than anyone else in the world. And so I thought we were the two best qualified people to talk on such an issue. If you're not across the latest information, Somerset and Glamorgan won their respective semi-finals. Both teams had topped their groups. We're going to do a little review of what's happened. We're going to do a little analysis of the themes that the competition has thrown up. And we're going to do a little deeper dive on kind of what makes a successful team. Because although you might think this is an unpredictable competition, loads of teams are missing players, there are certain teams that are now being successful year on year on year. But to begin with, Nick, hello, welcome. I'm so happy to see your face again. Let's start with Somerset, who reached the final thanks to, well, a very convincing group stage and semi-final performance.
No one's seen more One Day Cup than us. You'll never sing that, eh? You'll never sing that. Yeah, they've just been the standout. One of the standout sides to say with them, and then I guess it doesn't always happen this way, does it? But yeah, you know,
why have they been the best?
Well, they won them. I mean, they won the most games in their group.
Perfect.
No,
yes. Thanks very much. And they did actually.
And that is what we've got time for. They're a difficult one to describe. I watched them obliterate Middlesex within about 60 overs, I think it was, at Lords.
Yeah.
The only game that Lords hosted in this year's competition was done by about 4 o'clock, I think it was. And it's interesting because in that game, certainly individually, it looked like, you know, it's a really interesting tournament and no one's at full strength, but it looked like as good and as rounded a One Day Cup team as you could ask for. You had a lot of guys there for sort of different reasons, in a sense. So you've got, off the top of my head, in that game, they had guys like, you know, someone like George Thomas, who's the academy product at the top of the order. You've got Lewis Goldsworthy, who's probably played 50, 60 professional games now, spent a bit of time on loan at Leicestershire early this season. Kind of like find his way in the game, but he's past the young player bit. Casey Aldridge, James Rue are both playing. Once again, both young players. Rue particularly, they've also both been on Lions tours. You know, Jack Leach is Jack Leach. Riley Meredith is in Australia quick. Sean Dixon, the captain, is a really good county cricketer. Was, I would argue, the best batter at finals day last year when Somerset won the Blast. And it's probably pretty unfortunate not to have a 100 deal. They've also had, you know, Ben Green, who's a sort of a serial wicket taker in the Blast, back in their ranks from the 100 a couple of times too. They've and then you've got your Archie Vaughans, you know, dotted around. Your Archie Vaughan. So I hate people who do that. Then you've got Archie Vaughan. There was only one of him. Archie Vaughan dotted, you know, involved getting. I think he's played 5-6 games. Alfie Ogborn he's played 6 games, but he's a young seamer who's, you know, come on massively. I guess he's one of these guys who come massively through this competition. If you think of the guys last year who took a bit of a hammering at times, you know, they're on the wrong end of 2 400 plus scores, 2 double hundreds. They're a really young attack. They're not an old attack this time because they've always had the inexperience and the youth dotted around. But I guess the difference this year is you've had youth dotted around experience, whereas perhaps at times last year it was the opposite. Sherpa Shear played a single game this year's comp. I think there's a lad called I can't remember his first name. I'm going to say Joe Hayward, who played 1 game this year. I think he only bowled 1 over. He's playing the Super Fours at the moment. So you sort of remember how young
Fours?
The Super Fours is. Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that. It's
a fair question. You just said it, and I was like, I
think it's the under 18. I think it's under 18. It's the kind of it's the Bunbury comp for your best sort of under 18 players in the country. And
got you.
And that's going on at the moment at Loughborough, I believe it is. So you kind of forget how young guys are, and I guess when you remember how young someone like he is, do you remember the importance of picking them alongside lads who are, you know, who are Jack Leach, who are Riley Meredith, Charlie Castle, who had that brilliant debut for Scotland, played a few games as well, little short-term spell at the start of the comp as well, the comp too. So they've been a really interesting One Day Cup side. Andy Meads, I can't remember if I mentioned him before, like he's he's someone who sort of owes a lot of his career to the One Day Cup. He'd not done a lot for Somerset before the start of last year's competition. He was in the last year of his contract, churned out 600 runs, had a brilliant competition. I think in the process, sort of like dispelled some of the myths around his own game. If you remember the sort of perception of Hamid for a long time, because he was out of the game for a while, was that he was this guy who scored the slowest 100 ever in the championship in 2017. And perception was that he was a blocker and a plodder. And then, but the last 2 years, he's done, phenomenally and like really hearteningly well in this competition, because it's completely changed the perception of his own game. And has made himself a really valuable member of a squad that obviously loses a lot of players to the hundreds. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, they're probably gone through most of the squad there. They're a really interesting team, because they're not, I don't think, necessarily your typical sort of One Day Cup previously successful outfit, if that makes sense.
Well, we'll get
to that later.
But I think it's really interesting with Somerset in that, I think just counting through here, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players who have played 8 or 9 matches in this competition, and the maximum they could have played was 9. So they've had an incredibly settled side. You have someone like James Roux, who has scored 650s in 9 innings, which is just a remarkable picture of consistency. Andy Mead's become this kind of like joker in the pack, where there are players who are so valuable in this competition where their stock isn't really high enough to be bothering any 100 kind of deals. Mead's never played a professional T20 game in his life.
He's not even bothering the Blast.
He's not in Somerset's Blast setup.
Yeah,
and
but I guess
the
other really interesting thing with Somerset, and that to that point quickly, is that the One Day Cup is not set up to allow counties to do a white ball double, if that makes sense.
Okay.
No one has done that.
With you.
It's not to allow, but it shouldn't. The way it's all set up, if you have a very good Blast, if you're a good Blast team, chances are you're going to lose your white ball players to hundreds. So actually, to be in the position that they're in, is the reigning Blast champions heading into the One Day Cup final, still in the Blast. They're not unique in this. Hampshire losing final this last season. Obviously missed out on the Blast quarters this year, but consistently been a very, very good white ball team for a while. But it's really hard to do, and it is really, I don't know. It's a really impressive spot to be in that, to have created, particularly as a non-test county, without necessarily the same level of resource to be in a position where you are competing on 2 white ball fronts. But I guess we'll get to the detail of what that looks like in 50 over comp a bit later.
Well, to go from kind of Somerset to have been this kind of picture of consistency and kind of being remarkably competent throughout the competition. If you've got 20 overs of Riley Meredith and Jack Leach, you're going to do very, very well. And of course, they've got their youngsters as well, blah, 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 blah. But their opponents for this final will be Glamorgan. And Glamorgan have been an almost, rather than a picture of consistency, a picture of consistent miracles. They've had several fantastic victories in this competition. Their competition got off to the start. Their competition started with a kind of win over Gloucestershire, where Gloucestershire needed 31 off the last 33 balls. They were 5 wickets down, and then all of a sudden, Glamorgan took the last 5 wickets for just 3 runs. They won that much. They beat Sussex by 1 wicket, with the 10th wicket pair adding about 15 or 20 for the last wicket. Their last 2 matches have been almost identical, to be honest. They played against Yorkshire in the final group game. They were 165 for 8, and then they managed to kind of scrap their way up to 230 and defended it. And then again, against Warwickshire, they came up against Ed Barnard and Ollie Hannon-Dolby, who were bowling beautifully in the power play. I think they were 28 for 3 after the power play. They were 201 for 8. They managed to get themselves up to 247 thanks to Dan Douthwaite, who's blasted an unbeaten 50, and then they've defended it again. So throughout this competition, they've had 4 wins, where on any other day, any one of those matches goes the other way. And they've been such an exciting... I've only been able to see them in the flesh once, but I've seen them on the streams every time, basically. And something that's really fun to watch them when they're at the Oval, and I was on commentary, was Kieran Coulson is such an active captain. He was changing the field kind of every other ball. They have these 2 kind of, you could say red ball bowlers. I'm going to go for the more controversial club cricket bowlers, where you've got these lads who are nipping it about at like mid-70s, and you're like, how do you play that? It's just so difficult to score runs against. And Kieran Carlson would just be moving his kind of fielders around. They'd have 4 slips. They had real kind of like Brendan McCullum 2015 New Zealand field vibes to them. And when you mix that in with like the power and the kind of X factor that Dan Douthwaite brings, they have ended up being a really exciting and fun team and kind of the underdog of this final. I think is that a fair assessment to say that on paper, Somerset should be the kind of stronger team who are going to win, but Glamorgan, they've been such a fun team throughout the competition.
Yeah, I think that is fair enough. I think the other and the other thing with Glamorgan is of course, they are pretty untouched by the 100, aren't they? They lost Chris Cook, Mason Crane, they lost a bit of Colin Ingram. But as you said, as much as they've been more about consistency of surprise than consistency of selection, they've I don't know, it must be an advantage to not have that upheaval, I think is maybe the best way of putting it. And I think the other thing they've had this year, actually, they've not had the last couple of years, although this isn't necessarily an issue because it's worth remembering they won it in 2021. What they've had this year is a head coach in Grant Bradburn around. Last couple of years, remember they were led, and as I said, they were led also when they won it by Dave Harrison because Matt Maynard was at the hundreds. I guess what they've got this year is a squad that's basically their squad for the season. They don't lose many players, and they retain their head coach. It's probably stating the obvious to say. It feels like quite a convenient, important, useful tool. You're not having that early upheaval of getting used to things done a different way, losing a load of players, looking around the dressing room, realising you're the oldest all of a sudden. Like, none of that exists. It's basically, let's play cricket as we normally play cricket.
On the topic of upheaval,
that isn't to say they've not changed things around. There have been, there have been appearances for Asa Tribe, who's a young Jersey batter, Henry Hurl, who's played in the 19s, I believe, Will Smale, who's the older brother of Sophia Smale, the left-arm spinner at Western Storm and Oval Invincibles. So there has been, and obviously Ben Kellaway, who bowls with all the arms.
Both of them.
All 2 of them. So there have been. That's not to say they've just picked their championship side and run with it. They have been different and, as you say, fun. And somehow within that, Colin Ingram, who is a brilliant white ball player in any language, let alone, the current guise of Metro banking.
So, in the grand scale of things, though, as you mentioned, they only lost 2 players to the 100. A team who had massive upheaval, and we are going to mention, we were just going to focus on the kind of, in this section, just the 2 finalists, but there has been the kind of miracle of Worcestershire this year, who haven't made it to the final, but given the number of injuries they've had, given their position that the county as a whole is in, they weren't able to play their home quarterfinal at home because the England Lions fixture was already scheduled for New Road at that time. Nick, you are kind of bizarrely close to Worcestershire, I'd say, as someone who's grew up in the leafy suburbs of northwest London. Tell us a little bit about kind of what they have achieved, what has been going on at that cricket club.
Weirdly, given how slow the trains are, I think it's like the furthest door-to-door ground for me in the country.
Stop going. Just stay at home. That's what I would say.
I don't get that often, but I do like New Road. Dave, as you said, you covered it there, really. They lost Adam Hose to the 100s, and that was it. And Adam Hose was back in time for the quarter-final against Warwickshire. But they were near full strength. They just had no bowlers. Tom Taylor was fit. Well, Tom Taylor was essentially their only senior bowler. So they basically had to rotate him around, making sure he was fit throughout. And for their championship running, which is coming up now, they start with Kent this week, which is the 2 bottom teams, Division 1, huge game between the 2 of them. But they're missing Adam Finch to a knee injury, Joe Leach to a knee injury. Joe Leach retired at the end of the season, is trying to get back to the championship stuff. Yadvinder Singh is done for the season with a back injury. So is Ben Gibbon. Nathan Smith's hamstring has done his hamstring badly enough that he's gone back to New Zealand. He's done for the season. Brett D'Oliveira is recovering from, I was reading about this, it sounds horrendous, like a frozen shoulder.
Doesn't sound fun.
No, it's but he's the club captain. He'd bowled some leg spin. He'd have been another senior batter. Cashy Valley's got a side strain. Matt Waite's got a side strain. They have had no bowlers, and so we'll get this late. They got through, and so they got through in second place, and earned a home for quarter-final that was then pushed to Edgbaston by the Lions clash. So we'll get to this later in part 3, but they are the real anomaly when you talk about how teams have tended to do well in this, because the big thing you'd not want to do historically is rock out with a bunch of novice bowlers, essentially bowling at very good professional, often red ball gun batters. But they've had Jack Home, Harry Darley, Hisham Khan, Fatah Singh, Tom Hindley, Tommy Sturgis, Ethan Brooks was the other member of their attack. Tommy Sturgis and Hisham Khan were playing twos cricket for different counties a month ago. Jack Home told me last month that he thought he was going to spend this summer playing under-18 cricket and a bit for Shropshire. He took his third 5 of his life against Derbyshire, and the first 2 were against Yorkshire under-9s and Manchester Grammar School. And it's like that's the level of progression we're talking. Harry Darley is another kid. Essentially, he made his blast debut earlier this year. He bowled 2 overs for 35 and was whacked by Lancashire in a pretty brutal start. And you realise how, you sort of realise quite quickly how brutal professional cricket can be. And to throw and to have that and to go into competition knowing that's what you've got, knowing that could happen to any of these guys at any one point, it can go one or two ways, that can't it? And Hisham Khan's first wicket. Hisham Khan was playing for Derby Twos a month ago via Saka, who came through Leicester's academy, and suddenly he rocks up to play against Prithvi Shaw in the One Day Cup and bounces him out for his first professional wicket. It's a very Tommy Sturgis. You as the old Surrey club cricket fiend will know the name. 26-year-old.
I'm going to be honest. I whacked him up on Cricinfo, and I saw he played Surrey Twos, was 26 years old, and I was like, he must have played for Reigate Priory or something at some point.
He's probably.
I don't know him. I don't think he has, mate. I love this. There's a site. Anyone who occasionally listens to anything on might have the illusion that I'm okay at cricket. It's an absolute lie. I'm terrible, and I've been there every time I've played, so I know it to be true. But I actually I'm going the other way from you. You're saying, God, it shows you how brutal professional cricket could be.
Oh, but it's also amazing. Like, what
give you hope this year.
I didn't even mean it like that, but just the level of opportunity it's giving guys who. Tom Hindley's a really good example. Tom Hindley's a former Sussex batter who was spotted by Richard Jones, Worcester's assistant coach, net bowling at Loughborough a couple of months ago. He bowls left arm wrist spin, as everyone should. And Jones offered him a trial at Worcester. And next, he's gone really well in the competition. Boy, left arm wrist spin as a handy lower order batter. Someone was released by the county doing a completely different role. It's a really good example, and it's also, it certainly speaks to that point of but I think the other side of it is, and actually this is really relevant with Worcester. It's really easy to get caught up in the look how nice it is for all these young lads. Between Gareth Roderick, Ed Pollock, Jake Libby, Rob Jones, Tom Taylor, I think they scored something like 1,700 runs, averaging 50. The role of the senior players, it was a great line on Worcester's website, and I don't think they meant it to be intentionally funny, but they described their preview for the quarterfinals said something along the lines of, the youngsters have done so well, and they described everyone else as the remaining fit senior players. The guys who we've got left, who are currently available, for them to have put together the season they have done, also in the context of everything that's gone at Worcestershire, particularly around Josh Baker, but to come into a month like this when it's a long drag of a season anyway, and the stuff that's gone on there, to be able to pull that campaign out the bag, I think is a really resilient, heartening, and impressive effort. And had it not been for Kai Smith's fantastic 100, they'd have been in the semi-final, which would have been an extraordinary effort, really extraordinary.
Well, one of the reasons for Worcester's success has been the seam of Jack Home. And in part 2, we're going to touch on some of the themes that have emerged from this competition, including the kind of rise of the fast seamer.
The fast seamer.
The young seamer. One of the main themes that kind of transcends all formats, all standards of cricket is pace. And especially in the modern kind of context of Bazball and Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum picking people on attributes rather than necessarily a backlog of what they've done in the game performance-wise. Pace is premium. It always has been. It always will be. Unlike if you score loads of runs in the Metro Bank or you bowl a few tweakers, that's not getting you on the radar of anyone. But last year we had John Turner kind of escalate or like elevate himself to an England pace bowling contract. And then this year we have again seen a number of young seamers coming through, bowling quick, the likes of Noah Cornwell at Middlesex, Alex Green at Leicestershire, Eddie Jack, Jack Home, Nathan Barnwell. Nick, you were speaking to a number of players on the circuit. Who are the players that have mainly caught people's eyes as being this lad's sharp?
We've just named all the players I mentioned in the piece. So,
oh yeah, no, that's exactly, yeah. But like,
no, essentially, it's
expand on them. Who are we talking about?
Well, those guys mainly. I mean, but you know, in no particular order, I'd say like they're not all the same pace. They're not all the same age, experience, etc. Eddie Jack was, and you know, taking some of this pinch of salt. Some, you know, we're trusting the people, trusting the iHawk, you know, data, one of the cameras, one of the umpire cameras, and that kind of stuff. But some of the paces recorded, you know, Eddie Jack was clocked at something like 91 miles an hour at one point in the competition for Hampshire. Nathan Barnwell touched 90. Jack Home was at 89 at points. Alex Green is a really interesting prospect. He's only 17. He's 6'5", enormous. Bowls a bit like you'd say he's got an action a bit like Marshall Langers. Around 85 miles an hour. Obviously a very tall release point because he's massive. Fun enough, from the same school as Josh Hull. Sort of land of the giants. Imagine rocking up as like a 16-year-old opener to play against those two. You'd take your guard at square leg.
For those who haven't seen Alex Green or Marshall Delanger, like what does that mean? How is he bowling?
Talking about tall, broad-shouldered, like at you. The guys I spoke to mentioned him. Said they all said heavy ball. Everyone's favourite cricket phrase, which I think means not rapid, but you feel it.
Ow,
yeah, one on the thigh. He's only 17. A lot will happen. He's played for the under 19s already. Like he's on radars. And to be fair, as like the other names you mentioned there, so is Noah Cornwell, Eddie Jack. I think has been to an under 19 World Cup. Don Kelly also Hampshire is part of that group. I think Jack's quicker than Kelly. But then you've also got like slightly different names, so like some really interesting ones. Just to take someone like Rob Lord at Notts, who's 23, who essentially got his opportunity through club cricket, twos cricket, national counties cricket. He was another one who, when mentioned, when I asked a few batters, you know, who was anyone surprised you, who was genuinely quick that you faced, you've not come across, that you weren't expecting to be. A couple of guys said him. He was up around 85, 86 for a lot of the competition at Notts. And then you've got guys who are sort of, I guess, less surprising. So the likes of, take the two lads at Gloucestershire, Ajit Singh Dale and Zaman Akhtar, who ended up in the Lions squads that beat Sri Lanka. They've been clocked as two of the quicker guys on the circuit this season, let alone the One Day Cup. So, and then someone like Josh Hull as well, obviously, who took 17 wickets in the comp last year. He's obviously progressed to 100 and has been talked about by Rob Key. And it is that's what I find interesting. Like, as you said at the intro in this bit, like there's, you know, I feel like there's a lot of some well-placed paranoia around what this competition actually means. Where does it get you? What happens next? Is it really on anyone's radar? With the bat, I don't necessarily know what does happen next. I'm not sure that it is so clear cut. But certainly, I think if you turn up and bowl 90 miles an hour, whatever the competition, you're going to catch people's eye, and you'll join a growing list. And it's not this. It doesn't mean you're going to play for England, but it does mean that people might take notice and realise you've got the raw materials to work with. And you mentioned Turner, really good example. He's a Metro Bank baby in a way, isn't he? He had a brilliant 2022, I think it was, when Kent beat Hampshire in the semi-finals at the Aegeus. Turner took 20 wickets. And as you say, 2 years old, he's playing the 100. He's had franchise gigs in the SA20. He's got an ECB development contract. He's very well thought of. He's not a fantastic, not much. It's not much happened this year, but it is always worth remembering that is what happens with young seamers and young quicks a lot of the time. So yeah, it's just interesting to know there's a production line, and it's become quite a good platform to see that production line because so many bowlers are signed that is often needs must. It's in an ideal world, I don't think you want to be picking an 18-year-old quick for 5, 6, 7 games in the same competition. But if you've got no one else, and it's a really good platform for them, really good opportunity. So so it's been an interesting subplot, I'd say.
In terms of the kind of competition being as a kind of showcase to be picked for potential higher honours, whether that be, calling the 100 higher honours laced with controversy and drama, but there was some controversy in some courses with the kind of scheduling of the England Lions fixture against Sri Lanka, which was a squad of, I think it was 12 players who were taken.
12, yeah.
12 who were taken from the Metro Bank. And this was it was used and thought of in some quarters as an example of kind of the disrespect shown to the Metro Banks. Like, you're not taking the 12 lads who are on the bench from the 100, like those guys aren't playing, so why are you going to disrupt these counties at the business end of the group stage? And it meant that people like Warwickshire were missing Hamza Sheikh and someone else, I cannot remember, I'm really sorry, Rob Yates, for their kind of final group stage game. Is that something you buy into, or was it always going to be a case that, because on the other hand, if they just sent a bunch of kids who weren't even involved in the Metro Bank, then you're disrespecting Sri Lanka and disrespecting the preparation for the test series,
and then a week down the line, and then a week down the line, England beat Sri Lanka by innings, and everyone says that Sri Lanka haven't had proper preparation, etc., etc. I thought it about it quite a lot, because I think when it first happened, in the midst of covering the One Day Cup, being at games and stuff, the first initial instinct was, that's a pain for a lot of counties, and it is, but it's also pain for a lot of counties when they lose players to England. And when players get injured, and etc. I think the honest answer, I think the balanced answer is that a lot of people were probably slightly inconvenienced at the 100, at the One Day Cup. Counties, 100 teams. Sri Lanka lost, so Sri Lanka in a way. But fundamentally. And I guess at the same time, it wasn't a full Lions squad. So, that there is a bit of it that's like, ultimately, the scheduling was not ideal, but I don't, but I do struggle to see how the scheduling could have been done differently. The test series starts when it does. You're not going to change the date of the test series around who you can select in a Lions squad to play in the week before. I think that I always think that this kind of thing, the best thing to do is to ask the players. And if you were to ask Zaman Akhtar, who wasn't a professional cricketer 18 months ago, if it was worth his while turning up to take a 5-wicket haul against a Test nation, I reckon he'd probably say yes. And if you ask Hamza Sheikh, who never played a first-class game before, whether he'd rather play in the pressure cooker of a One Day Cup game for Warwickshire, in a group stage they're already through, but then in the quarter final against Worcester, or whether he'd rather make 90 against Sri Lanka's Test attack, once again the answer is a no-brainer. And so the same about Ben McKinney at Durham, who had been a big winner-takes-all game between Durham and Derbyshire. Durham lost it, but Ben McKinney looked $1 million, batted like there's so much Stokes in him for a start. I was obsessed watching some of his shots. Opening back against Sri Lanka. So in an ideal world, you want all these things to be able to work together. It's also, of course, worth saying that if they'd taken a full Lions squad and disrupted the 100 teams, the 100 teams would then have had to replace those players with players.
That's a very important point.
So you end up with one layer of displacement or two layers of displacement. And I think it is healthier for the game, and it was certainly healthier for the narrative, than to be able to say the 100, the one. Imagine the conversations if the One Day Cup was losing players in the week, in those last round of games to go and sit on the bench of the 100, exactly. And for what it's worth, I think on that flexibility issue, I think that needs to be I think that needs to be better done again next year, there was too much. I don't think that worked this year as well as it did last year, actually, in terms of the player releases. I think there was something like 11 players who were, that's not an exact number, but it's something around that number, who released from 100 teams to play for one-day cup games one-day cup teams during the competition. Part of that is because conversation with coaches and who they want to make available. Part of it's down to players, and also part of it's also down to the whole two successive game thing, which is great, unless those 2 games are a week apart. In which case, you could play 2 games, and this did happen, particularly earlier in the competition. You had situations where, for example, Hampshire played twice in the time that it took Southern Brave to play 2 games, and that, if that makes sense. So Southern Brave played 2 games 6 days apart, and Hampshire played 2 games within those 6 days. Yeah, like I thought that could be done better. That I think needs to be done better next year.
Can you just explain that rule for people listening?
Yeah. So essentially, I guess the best way of putting it is the first port of call to be able to move a player from 100 team to a county, for them to be able to play a one-day cup game during the 100, was for that player not to be selected for consecutive 100 games.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So you had to be unselected for game 1 and then game 2 in order to be
available.
Then you are potential. Then there can be a conversation about being available. It's been taken quite seriously. Lancashire and Manchester Originals were both charged by the cricket regulator with regards to one player who essentially played for Lancs before, at a time that breached that. At a time that breached that regulation, as it were.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I thought on the Lions. My other instinct when I looked at that team was it was a really fun team. It didn't have an obvious captain, but it was
up Lyndon James.
It was a fun team. It had 3 really exciting quicks in Hull, Singdale, and Actor. It had 2 England under-19 captains in recent and current, in McKinney and Sheikh. It had a couple of guys in Ollie Price, James Rue, Casey Aldridge, who all toured, I think Lyndon James as well, who all toured with the Lions over the winter. So we're fully fledged Lions players who were in that squad, whether they're 100 or not. And then you also had a couple of guys like Rob Yates, who are very, very good red ball batters who've been talked about. Yates has been talked about before as a potential England player. At some point he's been on Lions trips before. I'm not sure he was on the one over the winter, just gone. But yeah, and then of course Farhan Ahmed is the proper curveball.
Break his brother's record.
16-year-old child. But I thought it was and to be honest, and this is another, I think it was, another journalist made this point to me. I thought it was a fair point as well, that it was kind of a squad that also did like, you hope, like knock a couple of counties into action. That was Hamza Sheikh's first class debut. Warwickshire haven't scored. Warwickshire haven't won a game in the Championship this season. They've got an 18-year-old kid sat there who's never played a first class game, but is knocking out 90 against Sri Lanka. Ben McKinney is at Durham at a time when Durham are bringing in Amelia Gay, Will Rhodes. That's 2 left-handed top order players. And you just hope they don't sort of find themselves permanently above someone as talented as McKinney is. And likewise, I mean, just the one cut. I thought there were players that could have been picked in that squad who weren't, who might have caused, who actually wouldn't have been inconvenienced by. Amelia Gay being a perfect example. Someone who's not played for Northants in the One Day Cup since he was released since he signed for Durham. And frankly, Amelia Gay is someone who is good enough to be in that conversation.
I think that's an area where I kind of understand if they were to say the best case scenario would have been pick it from the One Day Cup teams that aren't in kind of competition for the final places. I get that, but I think the key point there, and the one that basically makes you go like, I fall back on, is if they'd taken it from the 100, the lads on the 100 bench, it would have been an even worse situation. And on just 2 other small parts before we move on to part 3. One, I think there's been some kind of discussion about whether the tournament should move from, rather than being the 2 first teams going to the semi-finals and the quarters being between 2nd and 3rd, extending that so it's 1st versus 4th in the other groups, is something I actually really disagree with. No. And the reason I disagree with it is because I think you deserve you deserve to be rewarded for playing well. So if you top the group, you should be rewarded with that rather than in a bigger way than if you just get to play fourth in the other group. That's my opinion on that. No, thing number 2, we now have to wait a month until the final. It's one of my deepest frustrations and bugbears about the county schedule as a whole, in that in 2 of the 3 competitions that the counties play, you get all the way to the final match, and just as you're ready to complete the storyline, to get to the finish line and are emotionally invested, there is a month-long break. And the problem that's going to present is Somerset can basically effectively play Will Smead, Tom Banton, whoever they want to, if they so wish. Anyway, we're going to move on to part 3. So one of the main kind of thought processes and assumptions about this competition is that it's a bit of a lottery, because you've got so many players that are going off to the hundreds. Squads are so mixed up that just plug it in on any given year and any team could theoretically win. But that is proving not to really be the case. 4 of last year's top 6, so of the 6 quarterfinalists, I know that doesn't really make sense, made it into this year's last 6. All 3 winners of the last 3 years in the competition's current form, in Leicestershire, Hampshire and Glamorgan, again, at least made it to the last 6. 2 of them made the semi-finals. Glamorgan made the final, of course. So is there a pattern here, basically? Like, of the teams that have been finding success, do they, Nick Friend, kind of share any themes?
Probably say Somerset. You probably wouldn't say so for Somerset, because pretty different sides what they've been in the past, and obviously weren't successful. They didn't have such a good tournament last year, but I think certainly, and to be honest, Glamorgan as well. Like Glamorgan, two of the players who played in the 2021 final when Glamorgan won are likely to play in the final this year. There's been a lot of movement there, so it's a very different side. But I think in the main, actually, it's the 2 sides who missed out in the. One side missed out in the quarter, one side missed out in the semi. Warwickshire and Hampshire, who I think like a really interesting case here. Like they are, so no one's won more games since the hundreds and the One Day Cup being played alongside each other than Hampshire. They've been consistently very good without winning it. Basically, they've been semi-finalists, they've been quarterfinalists, they've been finalists, and their side has been quite similar year on year. Because essentially you've got this situation where you've got. I tried to explain. We talked about this. We talked about this earlier, me and you, and I didn't explain it very well. Just try and put across my point slightly better. So in my head, this makes sense, and I hope it will make more sense than what I said earlier.
We'll find out.
So Hampshire essentially, what you end up with, the successful sides, you end up essentially with something looking like a pretty good Red Bull team.
Okay, yes.
You lose the best 100 or so white ball players in the country. So what you end up with Hampshire, if you take them as an example, is Fletcher Middleton, Nick Gubbins, Ben Brown, guys like Felix Organ, Tom Prest, who has played a bit more white ball stuff, holds Hampshire's record for their second highest state score. Kyle Abbott this year, Mo Abbas, gun Red Bull cricketers. Warwickshire as well, Ed Barnard, leading run scorer last year, leading wicket taker this year, opens the batting, opens the bowling, captains the team, played 5 blast games this year, bowled 5 balls in it, went for 11, didn't take a wicket. Doesn't really have a role in Warwickshire's or Birmingham Bears blast team. They've got a lot of white ball only players, a lot of guys who are primarily there for the blast, I guess. Take Moeen Ali, take George Garton, Jet Lintott, who's been involved in the One Day Cup this year, but is primarily blast. And they lose players, but a lot of the players they lose are guys who are very good white ball players, and what they retain is guys who are very good county championship players. So Will Rhodes, Ed Barnard, Ollie Hannah-Dalby, being a Michael Burgess, I guess, being like, and they are your senior core there. In that, Michael Booth is probably a step down for there. He's not senior, but he played 1 blast game this year. He's played more Red Bull stuff because of injuries as well. Michael Ray, the New Zealander they had as an overseas player in the championships, played a fair bit in the One Day Cup as well. So you end up with this side that looks a fair bit like your championship core, and then you drop your really talented youngsters, Hamza Sheikh, Theo Wiley's played a couple of games as well, around Kai Smith, who scored that incredible 100 that is the reason they reach the semis into that team. Hampshire are quite similar in that regard. The names I mentioned already, and then you sort of, within that you've got Eddie Jack, you've got Dom Kelly, you've got Toby Albert, who I guess that cut his teeth in the one Cup a couple of years ago. And then what you end up with the smaller counties, the less wealthy counties, let's say, and you do have a split this year, as you did last year, with 300 hosting counties and 3 non-100 hosting counties in the last 6. The 2 ways of doing this, and the second way does appear to be the teams who essentially aren't that successful in the previous blast retain most of their squad, which is a smaller squad and tends to be a more all-format squad. When you're a smaller, less wealthy county without the resources to build a squad for each format, and that's where you bring in, say, Worcestershire, despite all their injuries, only lost 1 player to 100. Leicestershire lost 5 players this year, but did offset that with Peter Hanscom and Ajin Kirane. Last year, they had Rishi Patel, for example. I think the players they lost last year, off the top of my head, were Colin Ackerman and Callum Parkinson and Ryan Ahmed. And actually, one of the reasons they lost 5 players this year is because they were rewarded for the cricket they played last year. Northants should probably have gone better than they did in this competition, with Prithvi Shaw, with only losing a couple of guys. So that's I don't know. Does that make sense? It feels like you're either a wealthy enough county that you almost have something verging on a Red Bull side anyway, or Red Bull core anyway, that's not yet picked up in the hundreds, or you're a side that is less wealthy, has its squad basically, and then if you've not gone that well in the blast, Glamorgan would be a really good example. Like this year and last year. To be honest, Glamorgan historically have not been a very good blast side. They've lost 2.5 players with Ingram to the hundreds. They've mainly been, as we said earlier, sort of at semi-fullish strength.
So it sounds like basically you're either big enough, and if you're going to correlate size with money, in effect, and money correlates with success, you're either big enough to be able to take the hit of when you lose your white ball players, you still have that Red Bull core that can serve you well. And if you are one of the less wealthy counties, you then kind of ride that wave of being kind of keeping that core group together, as a la Glamorgan this year. I
think so. That's the way if we take, there was something like half the top 10 run scorers in the competition are guys who don't play blast cricket, at the very least for their parent county. So if we take this year's, you've got Andy Mead, who's never played a professional blast game, never played a professional T20 game. James Rue has never played a blast game. Ed Barnard has played 5 games for Birmingham this year, didn't really have a role. Lewis Goldsworthy ended up on loan at Leicestershire to play in the blast. And Ben Slater, I think, played 3 blast matches this year, but really as a Red Bull opener, with a very, very good list A record. So, yeah, I remember a few weeks ago, if you're the regular listener, you might remember the chat we had with Ed Barnard before the comp. I remember asking him then, what is this comp? Is it extended T20, as a lot of people say ODI cricket, for example, is going, or is it like a shortened Red Bull game given the players who are around? And the truth is, got a lot of Red Bull seamers, you've got a lot of Red Bull batters, and you've got a white ball that does a lot early on. If you saw the first 4 wickets that Ed Barnard took against Glamorgan in the semi-final, they're genuine like Red Bull nick-offs, aren't they? Like they're not your typical white ball wicket. And also a lot of the decks are quite tired by this point of the year. If you take those pitches that Glamorgan and Somerset would have played their semi-finals on, they're games that they only knew they were hosting 5-6 days out. So, the quarterfinal at Edgbaston was played the day after the 100 game was played there on the same pitch. So there are a lot of factors that go into it, I think, and which kind of means you end up with this like Red Bull-y 50 over hybrid kind of thing. Like it's, but I think obviously a huge part of that is just the players you've got. If you've got predominantly Red Bull cricketers around, you're going to end up with a product that's a bit more Red Bull-y than T20.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's the kind of ultimate point, in that the teams that find success have that excellent kind of Red Bull bowling attack, and they're playing on a lot of outground, so a lot of club wickets where you can't quite throw your hands through the ball swinging a bit more than expected. And so the teams that really find that success have that seasoned
I
Red
thought
Bull
really-
steaming attack.
The other example there, and this sort of contradicts that slightly, but if you go back to the warm-up games of this competition, the Surrey Cambridgeshire game that was called off, that was called off at the first sight of real pace, right? So you play on, you've got outgrounds that are designed for mainly for club cricketers, aren't they? But you get someone like Nathan Barnwell bowling quickly on it, and you suddenly see these things behave differently. And yeah, I think it was Keaton Jennings tell us a few weeks ago on here that playing the difference in a good club pitch and a good professional pitch is really big.
Well, that's today's episode on the Metro Bank One Day Cup. Like, we're very, very excited for the final. Glamorgan versus Somerset. Gonna have to wait a whole month.
You got your blue and red. You got your blue and red Metro Bank bunting. Just
I know, it'll be very exciting. I might even be there at the ground myself, or I'll be covering it from home. Who knows? But if you do enjoy our coverage of the county game, you can access all of our coverage online for as little as £3.99 a month. Our own top team of county championships have now won the outstanding online coverage of domestic cricket prize at the ECB Domestic Cricket Journalism Awards for 6 years running. So you don't have to take our word for it. We hope you enjoyed the Metro Bank. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And me and Nick will see you and speak to you again next week.